now. So this whole time after will be recorded and will be available for others to watch online. So again, I'm Mary Beth Faust. I work with CBF Virginia. I'm the ministry coordinator, and this is Feast of Faith. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get started watching the video so that we have plenty of time to have questions. Can everybody see what looks like Sterling's about to say something very interesting?
No doubt.
Yes. Okay. And again, let me know. You can send a chat or unmute your microphone and say, hey, Mary Beth, something's wrong, can't hear. But for sure, let us know. Okay? So here we go.
My name is Sterling Severns. I'm pastor of Tabernacle Baptist Church in Richmond in the historic Fan District. And I've been pastor here of this historic congregation for 11 years. And the church is right on the cusp of celebrating 128 years of life. There's an understanding with worship here at Tabernacle that worship is something that we all do together, starting from the youngest among us all the way to the oldest among us. And so inevitably what that means is there's something for everybody, which also means that the flip side is also true, that people are going to have favorite seasons and the opposite of favorite seasons, depending on how creative we are with any given season. But the idea is we believe that everything that we have should be used in worship, which includes the physical space of the church. So, like I said, this is a 128-year-old congregation. The building looks 128 years old. You look around, there are scratches on the pews. It's a very historic, sacred space. And it's not necessarily a space that's designed for creativity, meaning you don't have fancy lights, and we don't have a whole lot of places that we can place screens very easily and that kind of thing. And so the balance that we live with continually is respecting the historic aspect of the space, but at the same time viewing all of it as something that should be used to creatively offer our worship of God. So there is a full embracing of the church year at this point here in the life of the church. We dove into the narrative lectionary 3-4 years ago, and I'm happy to talk about that at any point if anybody wants to reach out and ask questions. But we've been a revised common lectionary church before that for the better part of a decade. And with bringing the lectionary into the rhythm of things came the church seasons. And I just anecdotally, the season of Epiphany, which starts in January, is a season where we have stronger worship attendance than we do in September or October, which is very strange for a lot of churches. And a lot of that hinges on the fact that we really believe in using the physical space creatively to enhance worship. And so in January, there's this wonderful influx of light and creativity that comes into it. And we find that it bolsters and it inspires, and people are looking for something to kind of draw them out of the muck of winter. And so the philosophy, the idea is everything is used for worship. Everybody worships. And so the space should be part of that. Now, we're not a large congregation. By most folks' standards in Baptist life, we'd probably be medium sized. We average about 200 to 230 in worship. 3 or 4 years ago, we would have been well below 200 in worship, so we are growing, but we're not enormous. So we use the physical space to enhance our worship together. And one of the ways that we do that is not only in the decorating of the room, but as we use the physical space of the room, we don't just do it for the sake of doing it. We don't do it because we want the space to look pretty, or for people to just wander in and think, oh, there's a crown of thorns above our heads, it must be Lent. That's an obvious statement, and that's part of the deal, certainly, but it goes much deeper than that. We try to design something in the room that actually helps us move into worship in a deeper way. So we've yet to create an installation, which is what we call it, not decorating, but installation. We use it in worship itself. So, for example, you're currently the Lenten season. It's just launched in the Lenten season. Behind me is the Christ candle. Sweeping through the room, we have all kinds of dyed cheesecloth, which is very inexpensive and just over-the-counter dye that we used in an old washing machine in the basement of the church. But behind me is the Christ candle. So every Sunday, children are processing forward with adults with bolts of fabric that mimic what we see above our heads. And this past week, it's purple. This week, maybe it'd be red. I don't know what color it'd be, but they'll march forward almost like acolytes, where they will come forward, they will open the Bible, they will then take the fabric that mimics what we see above our heads, and they will decorate the Christ candle holder with it. And only then will somebody, once we've moved fire hazard away, they will light the Christ candle. And we will move through the season very deliberately, where the installation is still being created as we move through the season. And then, of course, when we get to Monday, Thursday, or more importantly, Good Friday, where more liturgical churches will strip the chancel, our version of strip the chancel will be to essentially destroy what's been created. And so the installation is something that's not a one-time thing. It is something that continues to be unveiled as we move through the season. And usually it's using duct tape and things that we have in storage somewhere in the corner of the building. So we're good at making use of the resources that we have available. Another creative aspect to the current season that we're in is we will celebrate Ash Wednesday by giving everyone triangle pieces of paper in triangle shape. They're going to write on those pieces of paper things that represent brokenness to them, broken relationships, something that they may feel ashamed of or whatever, and they will write these things down anonymously on paper. As they come forward to receive ashes on their foreheads, they'll place those in a basket that will be here in the front of the room. And after the fact, we're going to take drinking tea, and we're going to spray those pieces of paper down and turn them into brown speckled pieces of paper, roll them up, tape them, and make them look like thorns. And the Christ candle will be covered in these thorns the whole season. Again, which is something that is being mimicked above everybody's heads with an enormous paper mache kind of thorns. That is just one of many examples of us saying when we do an installation during a worship season, it's something that's living and breathing and changing as we move through it. So it is a real sense of we're building this thing together through the whole season. And then very deliberately, we disassemble it together here in the Lenten season. There's a core group of people that are involved in looking at how we want to approach the season, and that begins first and foremost with the pastoral staff. We have a minister of music and worship, and her name is Dr. Judy Fish. She's been at the church for 35 years this weekend. Judy is an amazing individual with all kinds of skill sets. She's very good at rolling her hands up and making things happen. So, for example, she's the one that dyed all this cheesecloth that's above our heads right now. We also have currently Kristen Coker on staff, a very gifted young pastor that is serving here among us. And the three of us have sat down here looking at the Lenten season before it has come to us, looking at the biblical passages that we know will be coming up in the narrative lectionary, and we try to find some consistent theme or thread that we think binds them together. We'll reach out through social media to other churches that are using the same narrative lectionary and see what they've come up with. And collectively, we dreamed up for this season a word, which is reconcile. And so once we have that central vision, we will then ask for a group of lay people to come alongside of us and begin to install this thing that we've dreamed up together. In its current form, it's the pastoral staff that's doing the dreaming, and it's the pastoral staff that's actually designed what will become the installation. And then it's the lay people that come in and offer their interpretation once we actually dive into the tangible stuff. So Judy dyed all this fabric. We assigned a layperson that we know is really good with paper mache to create the crown of thorns. But it was only on the day that we all came together, and when I say we all, that day there were probably 15 of us. They were children all the way up through senior adults, and we all came into this room together. I laid out, here's the theme of the season. This is what we're wanting to accomplish. This is what we think it's going to look like. But let's see how the Spirit will work as we do this work together. And in the end, this thing actually took a couple of twists and turns when it was all said and done. And that was the role of the lay people, taking the vision that we had cast in them and then making it their own. And then as we move deeper into the season, inevitably, littler things like this will be tweaked as we go along. Well, there's the reality and then there's the ideal, right? Always in ministry. So ideally, we did this last fall before Advent. And we had a group of lay people that were working in the belly of the building on a Saturday, sometime creating it. But the reality is life and ministry don't stop, particularly in smaller congregations. And so we ended up coming up with this concept pretty much toward the beginning of the calendar year, which would be the beginning of the Epiphany season. So at the beginning of the season that precedes this one is when we really came up with the concept. There have been other seasons, though, where we have projected far enough forward where we were 2 seasons ahead, and those tended to be installations that were much more involved, or involved a lot more lay folks on the front end of the process rather than the day of the actual decorating or installation. First, there is a sense that you have to have a church that has a willingness for this to be tried. And I will say that when we first dove in with our first installation, it was Pentecost. Pentecost was not a tradition or a season that was familiar to this congregation. And so we knew we were taking a risk in doing it. So we knew we couldn't spend very much money because it hadn't been budgeted. And so we started thinking, who do we know? Well, we got a guy in the church that's a welder for a fencing company. So we said, hey, Rami, will you go talk to your boss and see if he'd be willing to create something for us? And we drew it up on a little napkin, and he said, sure. And they ended up doing it for us at cost. All it was is some metal rings that they connected. Then we went to Walmart, and we bought some fishing line. And then we went to our copy machine and got some cardstock and made photocopies of people's pictures on these dove templates, shape of a dove. And all we did was we cut around the dove to where it was the shape of a dove. And on one side, it was somebody's picture from the church, and on the other side was blank. We asked people to write prayers for that person. And then we just hung them from the ceiling. So when it was all said and done, that was a project that cost us perhaps $100 total. We didn't have it budgeted, which meant that we had to kind of beg and borrow. But in the end, it was a fantastic, very meaningful experience. And so when it came time to do the next installation, we had people saying, how much do you need? So one of the great benefits to this is sky's the limit when it comes to creativity. You don't have to go big every single time. And once you've created a cache of things, for example, dyed cheesecloth that we order from the internet, we'll always have this fabric. And so whereas right now there are multiple colors above our head, we know that this white strand, which hasn't been dyed, is something that we'll be able to use in the upcoming Easter season. And so after a while, after you make the initial investment into fabrics, we find that it's not nearly as expensive as we move through it. We also are people that believe very strongly in working with other churches. And so we would say borrow from each other. You know, don't be afraid to reach out to churches that you know have done stuff like this before and to say, hey, would you loan us a long bolt of blue fabric? We've even pondered as a church playing around with the idea of a youth fundraiser where we actually rent out fabric for a season for very little money, but it's used to help fund a kid going to camp this summer. And so think outside the box. Do you have a group in your church that perhaps are really handy and they'd be willing to come to a sister congregation and build a bunch of shelves in a room, and in turn that church is willing to loan out fabric for a season or whatever? You barter with what you have. You use the duct tape that you've got. You use what you've got in the basement, and then you reach out to other churches that have it. And in the end, everybody wins. If you are a pastor and you have interest in starting to move down this road, I think the first thing is there has to be a level of education where you're trying to help folks embrace this notion that we're not just trying to make the space look pretty or be creative for the sake of being creative. So in many ways, it's validating what people already know to be true, which is this, our sanctuary, this God's sanctuary, is a sacred space. And it is a place where we come together and meet God. And so whatever we do with this sacred space needs to be respectful, but also creative. And so it's laying down that foundation of why you're wanting to do this. I would also encourage you to take a season that has not been a season where you've traditionally done a lot of decorating. So I wouldn't mess with Advent or Christmas. Don't mess with the sacred cows. Don't mess with the seasons where there's already a group of people that are eager to decorate the way they did it last year. in this congregation during Advent and Christmas, it looks like it did 40 years ago. And we love that because there's a pulsing to this. There's a rhythm to it. Again, what I said at the beginning, in the end, everybody ends up having a season that's especially meaningful. And everybody has a season where in the end they thought, boy, I'm glad that season's behind us. And so start with the Pentecost season, a season where the creative spirit of God blows the roof off the place. And so it's already introducing something that may be not overly familiar to your congregation. And use that as a creative opportunity to go ahead and bring the physical space into it. Be deliberate on the front end with involving children or lay people that may be a little bit older, teenagers or adults, in the unraveling of that theme as we move through the season. I would also counsel you not to feel like you have to stack seasons one on top of the next. Here at Tabernacle, we started with a really creative Pentecost season, but the season that followed it, we just let the sanctuary go quiet. And we left it that way for a while. Now we've come to the place where the church expects something different eagerly, actually. Believe it or not, they actually are desiring it. It took a while for us to get the church to that place. But for years, we would go quiet all the way from mid-July all the way until the Advent season, and then it was very traditional. So the creative stops weren't pulled out until January. They would go through midway through the Pentecost season, or not even midway, a third of the way. And then we would go old school again and just let it go quiet, let the dust settle, so to speak. And then the last word of counsel that I would have would be, if you're not the creative type, don't try to force yourself into being the creative type. You've got people in your congregation that probably are. The risk is, are you going to actually trust them to create something that you could put up with an entire season? In all likelihood, the answer is no, just from pastor speaking to pastor. And so it needs to be a very deliberate conversation on the front end. So if you're not the creative, if this creativity stuff doesn't just flow out of your head or your heart naturally, find somebody in the church that you think has a good eye and that you do trust, and see if you can't begin a dialogue now for what's going to happen 5 months from now. Or even come to a church like this one or a handful of others that do this type of thing very deliberately and allow us to brainstorm with you. Maybe we mimic a season together where you take an idea that we had and do something similar, maybe not as quite as extensive, or take what we did the previous year and borrow it and use it. I mean, Lent is always about wilderness wandering. When it's all said and done, we'll do different things with it, but, Epiphany is always a season that's about light. And so it's pretty easy to borrow 3 years ago's theme and do it, and it'd be very fresh and new with your group. We keep a visual record of everything that we've done. There are a lot of photographs that are taken in this church. We feel very strongly that, particularly with the generation that's coming into the church now and stepping into leadership for the first time, it's a very visually oriented group. And you have, these days, everybody's a photographer. Everybody's walking around with a camera in their pocket that also happens to be a phone or a texting machine. And so you've got people in your congregation with good eyes. You've got people here in the life of the church, inevitably, that are viewing faith through the lens of something that's very visual and not just spoken. And so for us, we take pictures of everything. It's very common to have a minimum of one photographer actually in the room on Sunday mornings. They try to shoot very discreetly during hymns when other people are singing, or only when they really need to get a shot. So we have a visual record of all of it. But we do not have a book or anything that resembles a written narrative of 2008, the Lenten theme was this. But the benefit of collective memory is we can look at a picture and say, oh, that's right, that's what we did in 2010. And immediately something comes to mind. In the Epiphany season and also in the Lenten season, we will choose a musical theme that we try to match with the physical theme of the room, and we will drive that song into folks' hearts creatively through the whole season. So this past Sunday, for the first Sunday of the Lent season, the congregation heard What Wondrous Love, an old hymn. We're trying to introduce old hymns to new ears that don't know that those are old hymns, in hopes that they will settle in. And so we had the choir sing What Wondrous Love. Now, what the congregation doesn't know is they'll still be hearing that song 4 weeks from now. and they'll actually be singing that song. Some of the most meaningful moments that we have found over these last several years are children humming a song that they heard 2 years ago in a particular season. Ideally, you have a musical theme that matches the physical theme for the season, in hopes that when I hear He Leadeth Me, which was the theme for our Epiphany season this past year, that it will trigger something in my mind that reminds me of what the space looks like and what we experience collectively as we move through that season together. So there's a visual memory, but also an audible. And we all know it to be true that when it's all said and done and we've lost most of our marbles at the end of life, it's the old hymns that stick. It's the music that we remember. And so we are somewhat sneakily introducing music through these seasons that becomes us shouting it by the time we get to the end where it's obvious. And that has become a wonderful surprise for folks. And so we have people that are eager to know what the theme song is going to be for the season, even though we'll never use those two words together, theme song. They will know because it is steadily present through the season. So we use all ages of the church in worship leadership here. That took a while to shift to. Our approach to worship is that liturgy means all of us do it together. We all worship God together. I say constantly in the welcome on Sunday mornings, we are not the audience. God is the audience. Worship is like a recital where we all bring the best that we have and offer it in unison. And so children, we believe, we know children eventually grow up to be teenagers. And statistics say that when teenagers leave high school and home, they also leave church and never come back. And we believe that one of the reasons that happens is because the church was never theirs to begin with. We tuck them away from the day that they're born into the nursery. When they become teenagers, we take them and put them in youth rooms and create environments that are solely centered on youth. But in the end, we are disconnected from them as a whole. Worship's the most important thing that we do in the life of the church. Everything begins with worship or celebrates the fact that it just happened. Therefore, children on up should be involved in worship leadership. And so with these creative installations that are brought into the life of the church one season at a time, particularly in Epiphany and Lent, also Pentecost, but especially Epiphany and Lent, we will try to create what we call a threshold moment. It's in a more liturgical tradition, it would be the acolyte moment where two kids walk up the aisle holding flame and scripture and move slowly down the aisle. For here, it's much more organic than that. And we have come to call it threshold, is what the pastoral staff calls it. The average layperson wouldn't have any idea that we call it that. But basically, we will have the children create something through the whole season that ends up taking on great meaning as we move our way through it. My favorite was several years ago. We actually, it was a risk, but we put a sandbox on the platform. We removed the pulpit and put it to the side. We didn't remove it, we put it to the side. We put a fairly large sandbox that was tilted up where the congregation could see it. And every week, children would come forward holding colorful marbles and rocks in their hand. So this week may be green. Last week may have been red. And what they did was they created a pathway in that sandbox out of these marbles. So as we moved through Lent together, the children created this beautiful pathway in the sand that we could see. On Monday morning, we take a photograph of that pathway in the sand in the wilderness, and it becomes the bulletin cover. Very simple. It didn't take 5 minutes to do that. And then, very sadly, always on Good Friday, the stripping of the chancel moment, stripping of the color comes when some grown-ups come forward and take a metal bucket and they removed all of that beautiful work the children had done and drop it into this metal bucket, which, it echoed through the room as you heard it. And that was a really hard moment that set in with our children. But powerful. There was another year that we took, this sounds crazy, I know, but we took a photograph of dirt and we photocopied it and we laminated it and put it on paint sticks. All right. We got a group of volunteers to come in and stain a bunch of paint sticks. We stapled these things together. And then we took all these horrible artificial flowers that we had sitting in a random corner of the building, and we stapled those to those sticks. And so Lent is a word that means spring. And so what we did was every Sunday in Lent, we had the children, all the children, not run, but practically skip down the aisle at the beginning of the service, and they would hand these paint stick flowers to people that would stick them in the pews. And we effectively created a garden in the sanctuary as the whole season moved along. It was powerful for our children. They were engaged in worship leadership. They could see visibly that they were participating in creating Lent for what it was. And then again, when we got to Good Friday, what do we do but pull all the flowers up, which is a very difficult thing. But the children understand that they're part of it. And so the role that the children play is directly connected into the decoration, into the installation of what we do in the season. And it's one way that we find that children can engage in worship, even though they're not old enough to read. They're certainly old enough to do that.
Okay. So I'm going to stop my screen share so you guys can see everybody that's joined us. And again, Nelson and Abby were able to join us. So if you heard those noise sort of click in between, we're glad you guys made it. So that was a lot to chew on. Thank you. So the rest of the time is really just a question and answer for you all. If there was something that you saw on the video that you want a little more elaboration on, you got Sterling here. If there's something else that came to mind, then feel free to do that. If not, I will, prod us along a little bit and we can go that way. But just didn't know if there was somebody that wanted to start. Anybody?
Let me have it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Okay, Michael, go for it.
I'm just blown away. I mean, I've known you, Sterling, for a while, and I've known that you are just so creative. And my question is, for those of us who are just less gifted and talented in that way as you are, how do we go about making that first step? I know you mentioned it a little bit, in that video, but any other kinds of either advice or a peer learning group, or I don't know what it might be, that you can start up put a shingle up, start a new business. What other advice might you have for the rest of us who might want to explore this?
Well, in all of thanks, Michael. I think in all of ministry, the goal is to be aware of what your resources are and make good use of them, right? Mm-hmm. So often we're approaching ministry from the perspective of I've got to do all this myself, when the mandate is actually for us to be equippers, right? And we know that.
Great reminder. Yeah.
And I constantly need it too.
Yes.
So some of it, quite honestly, at the beginning it is a natural gift. Creativity is something that has always been a strength of mine. But also, I just lucked out. We had Aaron Spinjamin on staff as an intern at the time, and a couple of other folks that were very eager to take some risk and to do things with that first Pentecost installation. So some of it was just putting people in a room and for it to be permission giving to say, all right, let's hear what your thoughts are. I would say also, Michael, that you can't force it. You can't force yourself to be something that you're not. But what I know you well enough to know, you've got a really good theological head on your shoulders. And you're going to be deliberate with whatever you do. And so I think the key is not just finding the random creative church member and saying, can you go make something for us? But to really pull that person in and beginning a conversation well in advance, along with a couple of other folks. And it may be that the safest route is to try something that somebody else has tried before at another church and to implement it.
Right.
I think so many times in ministry, we're begging and borrowing from each other, but we feel guilty about it. When the reality is it's all one church. That's what, Big C church stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say there's never shame in just taking somebody else's idea and making it your own. The other thing, and this is kind of piggybacking, I have talking points like everybody that I want to be sure that I get in, but this is part of it, is that you don't ever want to do something just for the sake of decorating. You're not decorating, you're trying to add another layer into worship, right? And so you've really got to be very deliberate into integrating whatever you're doing into the overall life of things, or the overall worship picture. So whereas you may not have a bunch of creative ideas that are ready to flow out pertaining to a certain season, you do have an idea of the flow of worship, and you have an idea of what you're hoping to accomplish in a season. Most of us know what we're preaching far enough in advance that we have a pretty good idea of what to expect thematically. So trying to be sure that you involve a good theological conversation, even though I don't use those words together a lot when I talk to lay folks because it's intimidating. But you know what I mean by that. Yeah, I'll pause. I could ramble on and on.
No, that's really good. Maybe the only additional question is, have you found switching from the revised common lectionary to the narrative lectionary, has that been helpful in the kind of the ongoing movement towards, what you're doing already? How have you found that to switch for you?
Okay, so I misspoke in the video. It's not been 3 or 4 years. It's been 2 years. I don't know what I was thinking that day. It just feels like it's been forever. So we're in our second season in the narrative lectionary.
Okay.
We committed 3 years ago to try it. I guess maybe that's what I was thinking. So
Sure.
Quite honestly, I don't know that it has been helpful on this front. Always using the revised common lectionary was easier when it came to implementing these visual thematic things in the sanctuary, because in the revised common lectionary, they've grouped these passages to kind of help match the theme. So for example, in Epiphany, we can always count on Epiphany Sunday, Remembrance of Baptism Sunday, Calling of Disciples. Like, these are standards you get every year, okay?
Right.
And all of that, the idea is, in theory, a good Lutheran taught me this, is the idea is that at Epiphany, the lights get turned on a little bit, the stars, but then the more of Jesus that is revealed to us, the brighter things get, and then it ends with Transfiguration. It doesn't get any even brighter than that, right?
Yeah.
Now, when we shift to the narrative lectionary, the creators of the narrative lectionary are more interested in the entire arc of the story. So we're preaching only narratives, so they're all stories. It's the school year. It starts in September and ends in May, all right? And so I'm in the Old Testament all the way from September until Christmas morning, the day that Jesus is born. And then I'm in the same gospel all the way from Christmas Day until we get to Pentecost Sunday. So they're less concerned with these blocks of scripture that lend themselves toward enhancement of Epiphany, because they're more interested in the narrative arc. And so it's been a little bit more of a reach for us, which has been interesting. It's not as obvious of a connection.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. By the way, I love it, though. I highly recommend you all look at the narrative lectionary. It's been a fantastic experience.
A lot of my friends have tried it too, and they really appreciate having to.
The Old Testament preaching for so many months is a real challenge for me. And I'm always glad to finally reach December. But I have loved it. And it's a 4-year cycle as opposed to the 3-year Revised Common lectionary cycle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody else? I have a piggyback one off of that. I don't know if Christy, if you're about to ask this, but for those that don't use a lectionary, could you give some thought to how this installation could be used sort of, I don't know, like sermon series, or I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah,
sure. So not a big deal if you're not a lectionary church. It's more, are you a church that works in seasons? If you are, then this idea applies just the same. There are some churches where a pastor is not going to commit beyond 3 weeks out, and that makes it nearly impossible. So I would just say for us, first, let me make a case for lectionary. it helps with overall planning in all kinds of ways. So for us, in the narrative lectionary cycle, we will introduce that passage on Wednesday nights by having a Bible study on it. Downstairs, we'll bring in a seminary professor. The children upstairs often are doing godly play stories, and the youth group is being introduced to that passage. Sunday morning, that passage will be preached on. Sunday night, often the small groups will gather together and they will process what they heard or experienced that morning. And then I teach a Bible study on Tuesday afternoons where we're the last group to talk about that same passage. So in some cases, we've got people that have heard this passage 3 times and discussed it, and sometimes even a 4th if they're teaching in one of those groups. And so you're really looking at a biblical passage from all over the place. Now, I know that's not the question you asked.
No, that's good.
But
that's good.
If you're not a lectionary church, I think it's just a matter of thematically making a way to, again, where you're trying to directly match what you're doing in the physical space to the actual series of passages that are going to be shared. And if it's not connected to a Christian season, so be it. Yeah, I think the main thing is that you're not decorating for the sake of decorating. Yeah.
Christy, I think you were about to ask something. I don't know if that was close.
I have 2 questions. Sterling, I think that everything that the pictures that we saw were just stunning. I mean, it's amazing. I'm blown away by it. We are engaging on this kind of a journey at Gayton, and this is brand new for us. We have a very beige facility. So we're about to have our first creative meeting. I would like to know 2 things. First of all, could you talk brass tacks a little bit about the creative meeting? I mean, is it, are you just suspending all judgment? Are the ideas going on a whiteboard? Are you post-it noting things? How does that look in the making of it? Do you have that meeting at the church? Are you off-site?
Yeah, good question.
A coffee shop kind of thing? And then my second question is, very curious, you've talked about risk. That's a word I've used several times recently in conversations at Gayton, that we're at a place of taking more risks. And as you know, risks sometimes can go south. And so I'm curious if you've had an installation that didn't work the way you hoped.
Yeah,
and
sure.
so if you would be generous enough to share that and kind of how you made your way through it. So those are my 2 questions.
Yeah, good questions. All right, so again, like I said in the video, there's the ideal, then there's the reality of ministry.
Right.
So from the ideal perspective, we are going off-site. We're looking at a whole year in advance.
Okay.
Whiteboards, sticky notes, the works. But the reality of it is we're in the thick of it. And I'd like to say that there's more lay involvement on the front end, but there's really hasn't been. And some of that's because we just can't get far enough ahead to do it, but we're working toward that.
Okay.
So the reality is I'm working with a colleague, Judy Fisk, steadily now for 11 years, that we're inserting new staff members. Kristen Koger is our current staff member, into this chaos and welcoming them into it. And so often what that looks like is us committing maybe a couple of hours into looking at the whole season that we have 2 seasons from now. And we're actually plotting it out and just pretty much brainstorming. Often, the best conversations that we have are in the space itself rather than going off-site. Okay. I like the idea of staff members being able to wander around the room with their fingers pointing at various corners. And it is a no-holds-barred thing, okay? And the benefit of it being just the pastoral staff is we've got pretty thick skin. And so Judy won't hesitate to say to me, that is a crazy idea. The temptation as the creative type with me is to dictate and dominate that conversation. And it is a constant temptation and one that I will often succumb to. And so when the eyes start glassing over because I'm overwhelming them, Rob can relate to this, that I have to just shut up and let people absorb a little bit about what I'm thinking. And often there's one idea that gets created and all of us realize that's the one. And then we start honing in on it.
Okay.
I have also learned that it is critical, because of the nature of the brainstorming process, that you land somewhere at the end and claim it.
Yes.
Because people that aren't processors that just absorb everything and they're okay with it, but actually need time to let this settle in, they're stuck on 5 ideas ago. And when they leave the meeting, they're thinking, wait, where did we land? I'm not sure what we decided. And so there needs to be a defining moment where you say, all right, everybody, are we committing to this? And if the answer is yes, then we must move forward. All those other ideas, great. Let's write them down. Maybe we'll use it another season.
Okay.
And so I would recommend that you do your processing, your brainstorming in the physical space.
Okay.
That you begin it always with the scriptural passages that are actually going to be used to carry you through the season.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's real easy to chase a rabbit, and you're like, whoa, how did we get here? And what does this have to do with anything that we're talking about right now? Okay.
That's great. Really good.
On the idea of creating an installation that has flopped, I'm happy to say we've yet to have a season that we were like, we have to take this down immediately. This was a horrible idea. My favorite season, you saw one or two pictures of it, were the cinder blocks. Did y'all see the pictures?
Yeah.
All right. Now that is not, very few of these ideas are original anymore, because we've learned there are a lot of churches out there doing good work. So Judy saw a picture on the front of a liturgical magazine with cinder blocks. It was from the Taizé community, actually. And what they were doing is they were taking these tea lights and putting them in these cinder blocks. And we thought, well, let's do that on a whole nother scale. So the idea with that installation was bring in cinder blocks into the sanctuary, and every Sunday we're going to light over 100 tea lights. Now that we didn't budget for the lights, so we had to order cheap candles, and we learned you get what you pay for. We still have, I'll bet, 20 different fire starters tucked in pews in the sanctuary from that installation. But I loved it because the idea was in Pentecost, we build the church with the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And so every day the installation changed every Sunday. So we had this random wooden door that would appear in different places. And one Sunday we had a baptism. And so some folks came up and actually removed the cinder blocks to reveal the baptistry, and then we baptized somebody. There was another week where the door was upright. We took the door off of its base and laid it and made a table and served communion with it. It was awesome. Now, I'll bet 1/3 of the church would say with me, wow, that was awesome. The other 2/3 were like, how soon can we get this concrete out of this sacred space? And I will still use it as a joke, because there's some old ladies in the church that just absolutely despise that we ever did it.
Wow.
I don't regret it because it was a risk.
Yeah.
But because we were so bold with that installation, we knew that whatever we did on the other side needed to be quite calm. The other thing that I would say is, and I would use this current season, is we've got that awesome, when we filled that video, we hadn't launched into Lent yet. We've got this amazing crown of thorns. We've got the fabric up. We've not done a great job connecting the theme to the installation, and I don't know that a lot of people have gotten it, whatever it is. The idea was we all start in relationship with each other, and then inevitably, and with God, and inevitably it leads to brokenness, which is what the crown of thorns represents.
Right.
Finally, we reconcile through Christ. And so when it gets to the Christ candle, it all comes straight down to the Christ candle. I don't know how many of our folks have caught on that that's the actual theme. Does that make the installation a failure? No, I don't think so. But it means that we lost a layer that we really could have had with a little bit more deliberateness.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know that we shared that part where you were talking about it, but when you were talking with us, you talked about how you guys sort of came in with one idea, and then as the lay people started putting up, somebody sort of shifted a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about
that? The people that actually were charged with hanging the fabric, and by the way, there are people in your church, Michael, this for you, there are people in your church that are really good at hanging fabric. You just don't know who they are. And we didn't know who they were, and now we do. And so they came in and they look at the space. I'm not very good at this. They look at the space and think, yeah, this is how this would fit here. So the 2 lay people that headed that up, or the 3 lay people that headed up, said, we're going to create chaos with the fabric on this side and order on this side. And that never even occurred to us. And so that's what I was talking about when I say the lay people interpret the vision and make it their own. And so interesting enough, when you look at that installation on the right side of the room where it all starts, it's all over the place, and it's kind of wimpy in certain areas and more robust in others. But by the time it gets to the Christ candle, it's it's in perfect order. It drops down beautifully, and that's what they saw when they hung it. And we thought, wow, I didn't see that coming. I mean, I would have never thought of that. Yeah.
Thanks, Christy.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Other questions on your mind?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I've got kind of a processing question because, Sterling, I've had the opportunity to hear you do this before at an event, and you and I've had a chance to talk. My creativity manifests itself differently, so it's less visual.
Right.
And so I do know of some people, and I'm in a place now where I want to begin this process, and I've got some thoughts of some people within the congregation who are visually creative. But to be able to see and have this kind of conversation is a way that folks like myself, Michael, whoever else can maybe bring folks, I think I'm asking this question to all of the panel, to come together and have these conversations so that then they can be spurred and actually nudged to be given permission to begin this process. Because for me to watch the videos and see the things that you've done begins a process in my head, and I think it would help these folks to also see and experience that, rather than, they've only seen our sanctuary for decades or a decade or so, and so to be able to see that, it may be okay for us to do something else. I think conversations and seeing these kind of things would help them as well.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a question as far as a process aimed at you and CBF folks as to if it's something that we could look toward doing to help nudge this.
Sure. Yes. I will say that the video that you saw will be available, as a part of this conversation. You could show this to people, but you can also show the video separately. So that 25-minute little snippet that you can see the pictures, because, when we filmed that, I was asking questions of Sterling and he was telling me, like, the sandbox. I remember being like, okay, I know that this probably was cool, but I can't see it. So then when I saw the picture, I'm like, I'm with you now. Like, I get it. So yeah, I think it is helpful to see those. And again, if there was one of those that you sort of wanted more, those came from Tabernacle. And I would venture to say that they might be willing to share some of the other angles of those pictures and a little bit more about the visual parts of that. Because it's helpful to see that. But yes, please let us know how we can be helpful to provide that resource for you, or come and be the ones who can say this risk is worth it, or any of those sorts of things. Yes. And there was a second thought, and now it's gone. But I don't know if that's helpful at all. But they'll be available on our website. There's a Feast of Faith drop down, and I'll send an email to you all when it goes up. But I would also love if you sort of take this further to share those stories too.
Yeah.
To share them back with Sterling, which of course he's also a resource for you.
Yeah.
I'm putting words in his mouth, but I think he would also be glad to have conversation, or email back and forth, or come and meet with you. You all are relatively close. I know, Michael, you're in Charlottesville, but it's a good halfway.
We'll see each other at the airport.
I was going to say, you can see in the airport if you want. But yes, definitely. I think
we'll do an installation at Hartfield Jackson.
That's right.
Perfect.
Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
I'm kind of piggybacking. Sterling, I'm guessing that Tabernacle will have either a Monday, Thursday, or a Good Friday service. Mm-hmm. And would that be in the evening, or?
Those are evening services, and all that's available on our website. And I highly recommend you come, because you get a really good idea of how we're using the physical space.
Right. And so I would imagine, I might not be able to, but those folks who are in the Richmond area, may be worth your while to just have a group of people come and actually worship in that space to get that full effect.
Can you show those times out real quick?
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm nervous. I flew in from Denver at midnight last night. Don't trust my memory, but I think they're both at 7. Monday, Thursday, we wash feet at 6:45.
Yeah.
And then we start the next section at 7, and that's because some people just don't do football. And we've learned to say, if you come at 6:45, we'll have a very meaningful time of serving each other. And that may not be necessary anymore. That's just a holdover from many years ago. But we would love for you all to come. I'll just warn you, at this point, we've been doing those 2 services for long enough that it could be overwhelming to you to say, I could never see myself doing this. It took a long time to get to that place, but it's an ideal opportunity for you to come and to see how we use the physical space. So we've gotten to the place now. When I first came to Tabernacle, we didn't have interns even serving communion, only ordained clergy were ever doing that. To now, on Monday, Thursday, we have round tables set up all over the room. People sit and eat olives and grapes and pita bread in the sanctuary while they converse. Everybody washes each other's hands, and then everybody serves each other communion. Now, that's been a steady progression to the years, but Monday, Thursday is a wonderful opportunity to come and see a really creative, very organic service. Friday night, Good Friday, is going to be much more of a traditional cantata, where you have an amazing piece of music called Return to Me that Terry York wrote years ago, and it is unbelievable. It's powerful. And then we use the screen heavily. And then, as you've heard me refer to, deconstructing our stripping of the chancel really is a lot of destruction of the installation on that night. And so that happens on Good Friday. So we'd love for you to come.
Yeah. I imagine that would be just really, really powerful, especially for those who've gone through the whole Lenten season.
Right.
Now to have this turn and get ready for Easter.
Yeah, that's right.
Two things. One, I know in Gaten's case, there are screens that you could use. And I know that you've sort of dabbled in the media parts of it. Could you talk a little bit about that, number one? Number two, Mark, I want you to be thinking a little bit, because I'm going to put you on the spot here. I know that you're a worshiper at Tabernacle, and I wonder if you might just tell us a little bit about what it's like to sort of come into the space and see it change and move. And I know it's sort of new, but that might be an interesting sort of perspective for us to hear from. So I'll let Sterling sort of go first, and then if you would.
And what do you want me to talk about?
Media, how you might use more screens, videos, sorts of things.
Yeah. So if you're not a church that has screen in your sanctuary, we don't either. And so what we use is this enormous piece of muslin fabric, which is dirt cheap. We hang it up and spray it with water. The children love this. We give them water bottles, and they squirt the living daylights out of it. And as it dries, it wicks and pulls on the fabric and makes it look like the whole thing has been ironed. And that's our little secret. So it's this dirt cheap screen that you just wad up in a ball, and when you need it, you pull it back out.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And so from a media perspective, that's my background. And so that's something that I've used to have a strong passion working with. Now I don't have time like I used to, but I've got this great bank of images that I've gathered through the years that I use. And of course, the photographs that you heard me refer to in the video. And so again, if you're not a media master, you don't need to worry about that. You just need somebody in the church that can do it. But it is labor intensive on the front end. But I guarantee you, your church has a teenager, a college student, or even an adult that loves working with PowerPoint and that kind of thing. We do some pretty elaborate stuff with PowerPoint or Keynote, the Mac version. And I would be happy to talk with somebody to kind of share the inner workings of how we do that, use the visual stuff.
Yeah, I didn't know if you guys saw those pictures sort of scrolling behind. That was sort of what I was referring to.
Yeah, Mark Snipes was one of them.
And Ernest Benjamin showed up all of a sudden.
Nathan Taylor was in there. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. So that's a bank of probably 800 or 900 photographs that we've taken over the last 11 years. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Mark, any thoughts? I know I put you on the spot there, so don't.
That's okay. First of all, I would say that I did not grow up in a church that celebrated the seasons of the year, because that was way too Catholic for them. So this has been really educational for me. It's also really cool it helps me when the physical space changes, it helps me to change my mindset from season to season. I think that's helpful for me as a worshiper. A couple of memorable things I would say is, first of all, there's a service where on the screen there are pictures of people in the church holding the communion cup. Is that Ash Wednesday, or is
that's World Communion Sunday?
World Communion Sunday. And so we were worshiping, and all of a sudden my 2-year-old shows up on the screen holding the communion cup. I will never, ever forget that image. It was so awesome. I would say the other thing is there's twice a year that I know of. I've been attending Tabernacle for about a year and a half now. There's 2 times per year that I just know that I'm going to get something meaningful to lead worship with. The first, and if I get these Sundays wrong, I apologize.
Yeah, that's fine.
First, I think, is Epiphany Sunday, where we get the stars. Is that right, Sterling?
Right.
And every year we get a star, and it's a cheap little flimsy star, but it's got a word written on it. And if you go in my office right now, I have that star on my desk, and the word is laughter. And I look at that star every single day. And it's just a reminder to me that though my work is important, sometimes it's just good to laugh. And it's good to be with people who make me laugh. It's just really meaningful to me. And then I think that the other time is, I think this coming Sunday, we receive a little cross, a yellow, I'm not sure what it's made of because I have no creative bone in my body.
It's made out of a palm branch or a palm frond, yeah.
But that hangs on my in my car, and I just look at it. It's a good visual reminder for me, because during that service, I get to carry my kids around the worship center, holding the palm branches, and then I get that at the end. It's just a really cool experience, a family experience for me. So I'd say those are a couple of things that really stick out to me about the way they do worship.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Anybody else have other questions? I know I put 11:15, but we certainly don't have to go all the way to the end. But Sterling is. Oh, somebody's got a text. Oh, sorry. All right. Anybody else? Thoughts?
I'll ramble for a little bit. The stars that Mark is referring to, that's an idea that we got out of some publication years ago. It's just a list of like 100 words. And we buy the stars on Oriental Trading magazine. They don't cost very much. And, I was in Colorado Springs this weekend with Dan Schumacher for his installation. And I walked in his office, and two of his previous Epiphany stars were posted there. That has become an incredibly meaningful ritual. And again, that's something that the children are involved in. Often the children are involved in the handing out of, in years past, or in some cases even writing the words on the stars. It's not hard, but there is that connection. And that's the hope. The photographs that Mark's referring to of World Communion Sunday, I have a picture of 2-year-old holding this, but I'm going to take another photograph 3 years from now. And so we see the children grow up through the years. Somebody that I took a picture of holding a plate with bread on it last year is dead now. And when that image rolls around next year, it adds a whole new layer of this idea of All Saints, which is connected to World Communion Sunday. They're usually right there close together by about a month. But they're all using visuals, using tangible things, giving out. All of that is extra layers of people engaging in worship in more meaningful ways, and from an intergenerational perspective. This is the generations all coming together to do this together. And that's where I would recommend that you start, is trying to get your head around this mentality of, it's not just for ordained folks to lead worship. It's not just for adults to lead worship. It's for all of us to lead worship. And there's a delicate tension there, because you've got transcendence, where people want to come to worship and experience God through transcendence. But at the same time, anytime you're going to involve children, it's going to introduce some chaos into the space. And that's very troubling to some folks. And so, again, you're kind of always walking that line. So you have to be saying out loud to everybody all the time, this is why we've come here today. This is what we're here to do today.
I'm going to go back to the camera and the photography.
Yeah.
Where you mentioned that you always have someone maybe in the space that's taking pictures, and that you take pictures yourself. Talk about when you do that, and the logistics of practical, like whose camera do you use, and how do you keep those images? And a little bit of that. Yeah,
you want a digital camera. I know that sounds funny, but I know somebody right now who has a photographer in the church that only shoots film, and so it's useless. So what you want to do is you want to identify in your physical space ideal corners of the building that always have good light and make good use of them. Okay. So just my photo studio here in the church is a stairwell next to a window that has frosted glass. That's my photo studio. And I've taught people how to take pictures in it, because there are certain settings or nuances. The sanctuary light doesn't change much. We worship at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Mm-hmm. So if you can have a camera in the church that is going to be used regularly, you just have the settings where this is pretty much what it's going to be. And at that point, it's just a matter of handing the camera over to one of the 5 or 6 people in the church that are really good at taking pictures. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
We're getting ready. Our first kind of partnership into the creative is with Suzanne Stovall-Vinson, and she's creating a piece for us this morning, actually, and a couple of people are videoing the creation of that, and we're going to be utilizing that video and then giving that piece out on Easter. So I'm super excited about it. one concern that I have is, and I'm wondering how you think about this. You talked about balancing bold installations with calmer ones. And I really appreciated that. That's like a good word of advice and something to think about, as we begin this journey. What about, how do you balance transcendence and immanence? And also, what guides the way that you see the installations in terms of their femininity or their masculinity? And how are you mindful of that balance?
Oh,
Like heartfelt challenge.
yeah.
You should have good
Yeah,
questions.
those are very good questions. And I don't know that I have great responses other than it's really important that you put a team together of people that are going to look at it from different perspectives. Okay. And I know that sounds like an overly simple answer to your question, but it's critical that you don't have one perspective as the one perspective that's brought into this. Okay. And then as far as the balance of waiting a certain season is kind of over the top versus the next one being simple, I think what you're trying to do is look at where the church is, or even the community that you live in. I'll give you an example. Christmas is chaos for all of us, right? We're exhausted by the time we get to it. So what we create in Epiphany is very intentionally reverent and beautiful. And often, I haven't used the word feminine, but I would just say it's very intentionally created to be something that when you walk into it, it feels warm and embracing, like a mother just gathering everybody together and saying, come on in the living room, let's sit down together. Okay? Now, so Epiphany is about light, and it's about warmth and revelation. And so it shouldn't be over the top. On Christmas Eve, everybody gets a candle for a candlelight carol service, very traditional. On Transfiguration Sunday, everybody is given a used candle because we don't throw anything away from Christmas Eve, and we form a circle of light around the sanctuary at the end of that service, and that's how we end it together. So there's this connection between Christmas Eve and Transfiguration Sunday, but again, it's all beautiful, warm light. Now, by the time we get to spring, everybody's off playing baseball, everybody's getting busy with school and that kind of thing. We don't want to add to the chaos of people's lives by creating something in the sanctuary that's going to stress them out. As silly as that sounds, the Easter season for us tends to be pretty low key. And some of that is because we know that families in the springtime tend to get spread incredibly thin. Our Wednesday night numbers start to diminish. So what we create in the physical space is not crazy busy because people are crazy busy. When we get to Pentecost season, the school year's wrapping up. Pentecost represents chaos, beautiful chaos. We pull on all the stops. We aren't afraid to go crazy in Pentecost. And so we do. And we keep it that way, maybe about 3 weeks longer than we need to. But when we feel like people are oversaturated with it in the summer season, we'll finally let it go calm. So I know I'm kind of answering your question from the back end. But you want to try to think about the season of, okay, what's happening in the family schedule, and how can the sanctuary help bring balance to where it does feel like worship and not just something adding to what is already chaos for me, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Any clarification needed, Christy? You're welcome to.
No, I think it's great. That's really helpful. Thank you. It's very practical. I appreciate that.
Also involving children in the actual installation or the decorating, bringing them into it and allowing them to come has been a source of great frustration for the artisans among us because we tend to lose patience with them. So we've had to learn to be very deliberate in that night that we all come together afternoon. We have a meal together very briefly. It's usually a pot of chili. And then I will explain the season. I'll play the song that everybody's going to hear through the whole season, so they're the first group to get to hear it. And then when we go up to the sanctuary, we try to have active mentoring with the children. That works for about half an hour, and then it all falls apart. And the kids start running wild, and everybody gets frustrated. And that's just the reality of it, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I love that we're bringing the children's perspective into the decorating. So it's not just the masculine and the feminine, but it's also the young and the old, the liberal and the conservative. It's a little bit of everything. So trying to have as wide of a circle as possible in the creation of this thing is the key.
Yeah. Great. I love that. I was immediately drawn to the cinder blocks, the installation with the cinder blocks when the pictures scrolled. And I was already thinking, no, how can we make that work? How can we do that? And then you said the reaction people had to concrete. And I thought, oh my gosh, yes, the 11 o'clock would have a reaction to the concrete, but it hadn't occurred to me. So I think it's really wise to balance all of it. I appreciate your practical side.
Yeah, you don't want to move those cinder blocks.
I know. I'm feeling you.
Put that in and you leave it alone. Yeah.
I'll save that for later once we're a little further in. So.
Yeah, you know what? Here's, I used a false word or a word that doesn't exist, sneakily. Here's something that you can do that's sneaky that I think is wonderful. We stumbled on this in our first season. Take photographs of the congregation and have them write prayers for each other on those things and use that as your first installation. Or use your summer season. We do this now every year in the summer. We put clothesline around the perimeter of the room and we hang photographs up of what God's doing in the life of the church on them. And then during the welcome, I'll point to them. Hey, look, our youth just got back from camp. See these pictures? Our youth just got back from camp. God did some amazing things there. And so now in the summer, people wander around the room before and after the worship service, just looking at the new pictures that have been, and all it is, on our color copier at church, they cost 7 cents per sheet. Whether it's an 11 by 17 or a tiny little piece of paper makes no difference. It's a flat out 7 cents. So it's not cost prohibitive for us to print in color for those types of installations. If you want to try to do something creative for the first time in this way, using photographs of the actual congregation provides a soft landing for that first season.
I like that. I have one other really practical question. What about when you get a wedding? Do you take it all down?
Good question. We have had to learn we've come to the place that we warn people, depending on what season they're going to get married, that this may be up. There have been weddings that we've had to take a lot down. And so you always look at the church calendar before you plan your installation. Okay. Because if there's a wedding, you have to build something that can be disassembled, or it has to be a bride and groom that are comfortable with it being used. And all of us have different types of sanctuaries. Some of us have sanctuaries that draw the larger community, strangers that want to get married and basically rent the sanctuary out. And others have churches that only members would want to get married in a space like this because it doesn't look traditional. But you do want to be aware of what's happening. That's a very good question in the church calendar as you plan your seasons out. We're less sensitive now than we used to be because now this is the given for us as opposed to the exception. But back in the day when it was the exception, we really worried about that question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
very
even,
good question.
Like cantatas for children's singing or, places on the stage so that they can have space to do those.
Yeah, absolutely. If you create an installation where, like when I had that sandbox on the platform, it means nobody can be up there through the whole season unless they're behind it or beside it. And so if you've got a group of children that are going to be singing, they clearly aren't going to be standing in the sand when they sing.
That'd be bad.
Yeah.
Great questions.
But you learn to build that into the installation. So if for example, we're always going to have this corner that we have to leave alone because whenever we have ensembles sing, this is where they have to sing. You better leave it alone. Yeah.
Know your space.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, and thank you, Sterling, for letting us videotape you and then watch it and then hound you afterwards. We really appreciate it. And again, Sterling's information is at Tabernacle
tbcrichmond.org, or if you look on our Facebook, you'll see we really do a good job on the Facebook page more of updating the banner at the top of the page. We're changing it almost daily, and usually it's the installation that we're showing or something happening in the life of the church. Yeah.
And again, this video will be available, but also the video in its edited format. So if you wanted to show that to a creative meeting or whatever else, you could certainly do that. It'll be on our website, or if it's not working there for you, we can certainly get it in other ways. And thanks to Chris for putting that together for us. He did a fabulous job. So
well, he's off camera.
He's off camera over here. Not gonna see you guys, but I'm really grateful for that because I was like, I can ask great questions, but cameras, I don't know.
I'm a camera guy. I think you did a really good job.
So anyways, thank you all for being with us this morning, and I want to honor your time and Sterling's time and all that. But again, Feast of Faith, we're trying our formats out. So if you have suggestions of things that you want to see, if this worked well for you, if you have another idea, I'd love to hear them and see what we can't put into play for you. If you're looking for a peer learning group or something, the Zoom platform is a great way to do that from other places. So just want to throw that out there for you too. But again, thanks for joining us, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.